So good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're based. My name is Casey and I'm the Digital Event and Content Manager here at Claravine. And I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, From Chaos to Clarity, Streamlining Your Content Creation Process. And moving on to our agenda for today. First, we'll dive into some strategies around standardizing your assets and data to improve compliance and consistency. Then we'll take a look at improving workflows and collaboration, sharing ways to make your content more effective and break down some of those silos between teams and stakeholders. Then on to measurement and attribution, how to better organize everything to gain a better understanding of your performance. And finally, we'll wrap it up with Q&A and resources. So moving on to our speakers for today. Joining us, we have Chris Comstock, Chief Growth Officer at Claravine. He has over 15 years of experience in the digital marketing and data management industry and currently leads Claravine's product vision. And David Porter, Senior VP of Corporate Development at IntelligenceBank. He has over 20 years of experience in SaaS and in his current role helps to drive growth, innovation, and strategic partnerships. So Claravine and IntelligenceBank have come together very recently to form a partnership which aims to streamline digital asset management processes and overall enhance an organization's digital experience. And now I'll let our presenters tell you a little bit more about what each company does, and then they'll get into our topics for today. And with that, I will hand it over to Chris.
Great, thanks, Casey. So a little bit about Claravine. We like to say that we data integrity starts with standards. So we have our, data standards cloud, where we're really, the vision is to help people, teams, and technology gain a shared understanding of their data. We'll talk a little bit more about some ways that this can happen, but it's really about putting a SaaS application that teams can collaborate with, understand what those standards mean. For us, standards are everything from metadata, naming conventions, link structure, tracking codes, et cetera. They kind of cover all those different things. So excited to be here today.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Casey. Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Thanks for joining us today. We are very excited to partner with Claravine and help to bring clarity to your content creation process. With regards to IntelligenceBank, founded in 2009, we are a cloud-based digital asset management, online brand portal, and marketing operations platform. We work with over 500 brands with almost 1 million users that access IntelligenceBank from 55 different countries. We have offices in Canada, the US, and Australia. And now what makes IntelligenceBank different is that our focus is on both efficiency and compliance in a world where the demand for creative is exploding, along with increasing brand and regulatory compliance. In short, we help companies to get content out the door faster, both brand and legal approved.
All right, so the first area we're going to cover, categorization and standardization. How can, both the problem that exists within compliance and consistency, and then some solution and best practices. So David, I'll hand it over to you to get started.
Thanks, Chris. There are a couple high-level problems that we see all the time with regards to categorization and standardization, namely that assets are not organized properly, and there's a complete lack of standardization. So folders can be useful for high-level categorization and settings such as permissions. However, where most organizations go wrong with folders is they end up becoming far too granular. And they try to use folders to define elements such as metadata or file type. And this can lead to a seemingly endless cascading folder hierarchies with very limited purpose. There's nothing worse than drilling down kind of 12 folders deep to find an asset only to see it's not the one that you're looking for. It's like an Easter egg hunt with no eggs. So even worse is having 12 folders with only 8 assets in them, as each folder tries to make an effort to define an element of each of the assets, such as file type. It's very easy to think folders make things easier to find. However, unless it's mapped logically, in the end, it can end up hiding your content. So folder structures like the ones depicted above are best avoided. It's unlikely that all these folders will be kept up to date, so you'll end up with out-of-date assets and not a single source of truth for your assets, which is extremely important. So, audits oftentimes reveal that you have files with inconsistent names. So when it comes to standardization, it's really important that we have naming conventions in place and version history in place in a similar way. So in this example, there's two different files, each with its own version included in the name, similar yet different. So one has version 2 in the name, another has final. Another one has the publish date after the one called final. So in addition, you can see that there's an identical document with a slightly different name, Content Creation Guide versus Guide to Content Creation. So clearly, this is going to create problems when end users try to find the most up-to-date version of the assets that they require.
Great. So what we often see in the problem, obviously, there's the content problem moving into more kind of the operations marketing data. It's really messy. Software has made it really easy. SaaS applications like, both IntelligenceBank and Claravine. But at the enterprise and a lot of the brands we work with, there's over 50 different point solutions that are being used within the organization. Many of those actually turn over year over year. Pull together all the different teams, people that are interacting with these different systems, the turnover, you end up with 21,000 different connections. So very, very messy. I don't think this is probably anything new. And when we think about marketing transformation, that turnover, the speed at which digital moves, MarTech 8,000 now is over 10,000 different applications and continuing to grow. So just keeps perpetuating that challenge. One way we like to help kind of visualize that problem, if you will, take a look at the name field here. The standardization teams have been doing it, but often in silos. So you look here, you've got your email team, your programmatic team, all the way down to content. There typically is some level of structure that each individual team is doing. There just isn't alignment in standardization. So you see the difference, possibly gaps in that data. And as that works its way through the system, from content creation all the way to measurement, you often see teams struggling to understand what piece of content was used for what marketing campaign, which ultimately provides challenges for understanding what's working and what's not working. David, we might have lost audio from you.
Apologize. So there are real world costs associated with this problem. 64% of marketers struggle with content and duplication efforts, and 88% of marketers need an easier way to discover and share assets.
Yeah, and we often see, 80% of companies at some point have lost revenue to some of those data challenges. And now, obviously, with the growth of even recently AI, data scientists are spending 80% of the time trying to clean and prepare that data to take advantage of that, which ultimately leads to upwards of $10 to $14 million in lost opportunity or revenue cost to the company. Now we're going to get into the solution around categorization and standardization.
Yeah, so good news is there is some solutions that you can take advantage of, and first and foremost, with metadata modeling and taxonomy development, you can ensure your content lives in the right location and can easily be found and tracked by your stakeholders. By using layers of criteria such as custom filters, metadata, and keywords that reflect how your users think about the assets, you can simplify and accelerate your user experience and therefore drive efficiency in your organization. In a nutshell, people can find what they're looking for with less clicks and a lot more accuracy, which leads to increased use and relevancy within the organization. So really important is when it comes to standardization is to have consistent naming conventions when making it easier for people to identify the right file the first time. So we recommend you avoid jargon and keep the file name short and simple. Rename inconsistent files to help people find what they're looking for. And if it's actually the same file, use version control rather than some other mechanism to identify the file. That way your team can easily find the latest file quickly, which is what they really want in the first place. So additionally, a solid duplicate record identification system during the upload process will help you to avoid publishing the same file in multiple locations. And this will help to eliminate the risk of having outdated non-compliant assets that exist in multiple locations. You can use features such as aliases to then represent the same file in multiple locations if that's relevant to your use case, while still maintaining only the one master file.
All right. So often how we talk about this problem, kind of solution, I should say, really leaning in and understanding, being proactive about that change management. So too often, I think we've, all wanted to clean things up afterwards, hope that the data is all collected. We really believe that proactive approach can help create that collaboration across those teams. That collaboration is, leaning in and understanding there are those taxonomies that exist. There's a reason they exist. Trying to create that alignment, continuity, from your content teams all the way to your, even across your marketing teams. And then ultimately the goal there, which we often help with, is that automation. How do we make sure that data gets, in that consistent manner from day one, flowing through to all the teams and all the systems that need the right piece of metadata to either execute on a campaign, personalize an experience, or even just for some searchability and things like David talked about. All right, now we're going to jump into streamlining collaboration and workflow.
Fantastic. So what we see is in certain instances of a lack of collaboration and very inefficient workflows. So marketing and compliance oftentimes lack collaboration and sometimes have very competing goals. So the need for more content quickly versus checks and balances for regulatory and brand compliance. This leads to assets being released that are not compliant and inefficient workflows that mean assets take longer to produce and release. And obviously, this is a heavy bottleneck spot between creative, marketing, compliance team, and task duplication happens due to inefficiencies in this process. So 83% of teams say they aren't as efficient as they could be due to not having the right processes and tools in place.
All right, so we work through getting that right content to the right person. So we talked about kind of the problem. This is another kind of view of how that problem manifests itself globally for a lot of the bigger companies, where you've got different teams, you've got different systems, maybe different agencies involved. That consistency, that common data language can ultimately be difficult to maintain and communicate and manage the change to the taxonomy, which inevitably is going to change from the time it gets set. If we think about kind of building through that content creation, when those creative assets make their way into your ad server to your email system, that metadata often can get lost and puts a burden on some of these operations teams. Are they taking and configuring these campaigns with the right information? Then you've got your analytics team who may not understand, they see results in their dashboard, in Adobe, Google Analytics, et cetera. Understanding what the context was, what was the audience that was being targeted, what was the creative message that was being delivered or intended to be delivered. And then ultimately at the end, you've got, what we often refer to as the data consumers, the teams that are relying on that data to make the business decisions to, ultimately either acquire new customers, drive more revenue, or increase brand awareness. So now we're going to get into some solutions to help with these problems.
Yeah, the good news is that you can establish campaign workflows and collaboration tools in order to eliminate this problem. Using the features of a marketing operations software can help your teams work better together. By setting up a proper process through intake forms, creative briefs, and workflows within your software, you can aid in collaboration. In addition to that, clearly defining the steps and people involved will ensure each person in the creative process knows their role and when they need to step in. This will decrease the chances of duplicate work being done since all steps and stakeholders are visible throughout the process. So we can see here, it doesn't matter if we start with a creative brief or upload of an asset, we walk through the similar series of steps that ensures everything is on brand compliant and before we release the final creative to the DAM. So to solve for inefficient workflows, you should use workflow tools with the ability to collaborate on any asset that are either a work in progress, new uploads, or renewed. This is important to ensuring your assets are brand compliant and meet the regulatory requirements. So in-platform collaboration with capabilities such as markup comments depicted here and @mentions allow you to work efficiently across the teams and regions while enabling the additional benefit of an audit history for assets that are out in the wild. This allows you to ensure the workflows are as efficient as possible while maintaining compliance. And when there's trouble, you can identify where those assets have been used and recall them quickly. So as mentioned in the introduction, IntelligenceBank has almost 1 million users in 55 countries. So even without COVID, teams need an efficient workflow and collaboration tool, or they'll struggle to keep up and the throughput will lag.
Great. When we talk about data standards, often become the common thread to content creation all the way through to optimization as we talk about. The connectivity, there's still a lot of manual things that happen. Again, we talk about naming conventions and metadata and things, but there's often things that get handed off, either through workflow tools, as it works its way, out even maybe into your external media agency who's actually running your media using assets that initially lived or were created in the dam. And so I mentioned that kind of proactive approach. The first is, establishing that taxonomy, creating the alignment across the teams, have the conversation, reach out to those different teams. There's likely a reason they may be doing what they're doing. And there may be some things through that collaboration that you can, learn and connect and understand where are the common pieces of that taxonomy, how do they fit, common elements such as, brand information, channel information, creating that alignment that even if you are still operating independently, there's a common understanding that can, as it makes its way into the analytics teams, can create some common, like, again, we call data standards for teams to be able to more efficiently make sense of the data and spend less time cleaning it up. And ultimately, when we think about naming conventions, the naming convention typically is the way that data is communicated and making it easier for that handoff. So if there's any project IDs or things, which we'll talk a little bit about, but how do we make it easy for the team that now has to take 100, 200 assets and build the marketing campaigns, make it easy so they don't worry that they've set up the campaign incorrectly and ultimately have to spend less time searching and more time, building campaigns, optimizing those campaigns. All right, getting a little bit kind of further into that measurement and attribution. So better categorization to understand, how do we understand the performance of what's working and what's not working?
So when it comes to measurement and attribution, this problem we see is lack of asset tracking, which means you can't track asset ROI and legal usage. So without seeing metrics like downloads, shares, views, and impressions, there's no way to track asset ROI or usage. And the cost of not tracking this is high. According to Accenture, 90% of marketing material is never put to use because it's not relevant, out of date, or not accessible. So most organizations could obviously become more efficient at reusing or repurposing their existing assets that they already spent good time and money creating.
All right, as we think about the impact, we touched a little bit on this, the data science teams, measurement teams, spend time trying to understand and validate the data that they're receiving. We often still see teams working in spreadsheets. So an example here where you've got a media trafficking sheet is just kind of one example, but teams are still managing a lot of the data to create links, to create naming conventions, to manage what they call their taxonomy, which often means that data and that metadata that could be useful for your analytics and measurement teams are not making their way to the analytics team, which means that, typically teams are spending 2.5, according to Forrester, spending 2.5 hours daily or 30% of their week trying to find the right data, understanding if the data that they have that they can trust to make informed business decisions on. Now let's get into some solutions.
So the solution from our perspective is pretty simple. Use a tool that can track your asset usage, track approvals and versions of campaign requests and files for audit and compliance. Report on process stats with custom reports such as time to market, approval bottlenecks, and briefs, and approvals that have completed the cycle. Understand usage by user, by group, and by asset. And if you understand performance, you can improve the process. And then showing spend versus activations and other ROI metrics by campaign can assist you in your decisions and helping to gain additional efficiency.
Great. So we talked a little bit about naming conventions. Just kind of an example, naming conventions are still something that are core to making it easier to understand when you log into the specific point solutions. What's a given campaign, still used for some of the searchability, still used, everything down to tracking codes and, logic that's embedded within this information. This is just kind of an example of one structure as it relates to channel, campaign objective, a region. Everyone has a different version. This could be flipped on its head for someone else. So we talked about that. One thing that we don't often see, which is tends to be a best practice, is how do we embed IDs from other systems. So we talked about those handoffs from one team to another team, incorporating unique identifiers from those platforms in those naming conventions can make it easier to turn kind of text fields into a way for teams to have a unique identifier that's unique to either that platform, a workflow, an internal campaign. So when you bring it all together, either in your data warehouse, your data lake, et cetera, you have that unique identifier, which is going to remain consistent, where typically text fields are ultimately going to change over time, and they could change for good reason, but it allows you to manage that change over time by having that unique, consistent ID to join all those various data sets together. And then a visual, we like to show the kind of nice, clean, pristine kind of view of that data, whether you're looking at content, assets, information, all the way up to emails. You get that clean, consistent data model across all those teams. That ultimately means, the whole set of people and teams together can move much faster, ultimately driving more revenue. And to wrap kind of the three areas we covered, from compliance and consistency, breaking down those silos between the teams to create efficiency, and then better categorization to understand the performance across your different teams.
So this is going to help to make data management easier with categorization and standardization, allow more compliant content to be created and delivered faster between the teams, and also help you to understand the ROI for the assets and your marketing performance.
All right. And that has been the presentation portion of our webinar today. So we now have a couple moments for Q&A. So again, feel free to submit those questions via the Zoom Q&A section or in the chat here. And we can go ahead and take one that came in. So this question is asking, what are the various first steps someone should take when dealing with content that is currently a mess? So what would you say, I guess, is most important, or what should someone do first?
Yeah, I can take that one. So, I mean, we see this all the time where people have content all over the place, lacks any sort of standardization. So the first step is to find it. Where is it all? Shared drives, DAMs, Box, G Drive, individual laptops. And then the second step is to decide what is truly needed and what can be archived. And then once that's completed, we can get all the assets into one place and work on naming conventions, standardization, metadata modeling, keeping in mind your user personas and how your organization works. So IntelligenceBank has dedicated implementation professionals that can assist you with all of that effort, or we work also sometimes with third-party consultants as needed.
I think the thing I'd add that we see is don't make it a priority up front, which I think, David, you're talking about from an implementation, but don't think of it as something that's a second class project. If you make it first order and make it part of what needs to happen, we ultimately have seen more success in the long run, but it's oftentimes that people aren't wanting to make it part to get a new tool or new implementation out. But the data piece, a lot of what we talked about, is just as essential in the success of the project.
Awesome. Another one that came in, the campaign to asset creation and management is all managed within a tool. How is this better? I guess, how does this compare to Adobe Assets?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. We find lots of our customers are looking for a solution that can be tailored to their requirements rather than being stuck within a specific workflow. So be happy, whoever's asked that question, to walk you through how IntelligenceBank works relative to Adobe Assets.
All right, and we'll take one more here. Can you just sum up some of the benefits of using both of your solutions together?
I think really what we've just identified in terms of solutions around all of those problems is a great way to frame up how working with IntelligenceBank and Claravine together is a powerful solution. So in terms of working across creative and marketing creative, marketing, and compliance departments within our client organizations, we offer a very powerful solution.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, when we first, started kind of embarking on that partnership, it was recognizing everything we covered today and the importance of the data and the standardization and the workflows as it works its way through, teams from content creative all the way to analytics. We just felt like we both were on the same page in terms of making this a priority.
All right, well, if we don't have any other questions right now, we can move on to resources. So for reference, if you want to reach out to our presenters today, we do have their emails up on screen. And we will be sharing out some links in our follow-up email, including a registration link to Claravine's next webinar and a few educational playbooks from IntelligenceBank. And that has been it. That's everything from us today. Thank you again for joining us live. Thank you to Chris and David. We will be sending out this recording within 24 hours, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.